Alright guys, so lesson 3 is 8-4, and this is going to give you a little bit of comfort today because this is something that you're more used to. We're doing customary units of length, but I actually hope that I think that you're going to notice by the end of this that metric conversions are actually a little bit easier. But if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. I get it. But customary is what we call it in the United States for measuring length and length and volume and mass and things like that. So customary units of length are these three that you're looking at the top of this little chart here. By the way, I went kind of fast. Use this 8-4. Make sure your SAB is open. But what they're showing you is that if you have a foot, that's the same as 12 inches. Okay? If you have a yard, that's the same as 3 feet, which is also the same as 36 inches. And if you have a mile, that is the same as 1,760 yards, and also the same as 5,280 feet. Now here's my gripe with the customary system. These are all just things that you have to learn. You know, you have to memorize them. There's no other way to use them except for to have them sort of memorized. So foot and 12 inches is easy enough. A yard is 3 feet is easy enough. But then a mile is where things start to get a little bit hairy. So know that you can use this chart today to totally help you out, and you're just going to be multiplying to make it a larger or a smaller unit that you're measuring by, which means there will be more of them. Or you'll go the opposite way, which means you are taking a smaller measurement and turning it into a bigger measurement, which means that there will be less of them. Okay, so for example, let's look at this one. Example 1 says convert to a smaller unit. You're going from yards to feet, so you're going to have more feet because they're a smaller unit of measurement. So this time you're going to multiply. So I'm going to do 15 yards. Well, how many feet are there in 1 yard? There are 3. So it says you're going to multiply by 3 because there are 3 feet in a yard. So then you would do 45 feet. You can also go the opposite way. If you had inches to feet, well, inches are much smaller and then feet are bigger. So because of that, this number is going to be smaller. Then that means you're going to divide it. So you're going to take your 48 and you would have divided it by 12 because there are 12 inches in a foot to make it 48. So let's look at some examples here. This time on number 1, I'm going from inches to feet. So that's the example that we just did. Inches are smaller and feet are larger. So I know that this number is going to get this number is going to get smaller, which means I need to divide it by 12. So 24 divided by 12 would be 2 feet right there. Okay, I'm going to go over here to number 2, which is on the right side. This is 24 feet into yards. Well, feet are smaller than yards, so because of that, this number is going to get smaller, which means, again, I need to divide. And there are, how many feet in a yard? There were 3. So I'm going to divide this number by 3. 24 divided by 3 is 8. This is one where we're going to go the opposite direction. So your feet are larger and inches are smaller, so there's going to be more of them, which means I need to multiply. And in order to know what I need to multiply is how many inches are there in a foot? There are 12. So I'm going to do 12 times 12, which is 144. And this time, well, this one's kind of tricky. It wants you to go from some imaginary number of feet into yards. Okay, well, here's what you need to imagine. Your feet are smaller than yards. Yep, meaning that there are more of them in a yard. So if I had 1 full yard, how many feet is that? That's going to be 3 feet. But then if I had half of a yard, how many feet is that going to be? That's going to be 1.5, because you're finding half of 3, which is 1.5, and that means altogether you would have 4.5 feet of yards. Sorry, 4.5 feet, which is the same as 1.5 yards. I'm a little tongue-tied today. These ones are hardest because now that you know decimals and fractions, they're going to obviously not try to trick you, but they're going to make life a little bit harder here. So you have to remember, you kind of have to figure out ways to solve that. So the way I did that is I just split up the 1 and the half in order to figure that out. Okay? Let's look at number 5. We're going from feet to yards, and that is going to end up being, this is going to be a larger number because feet are smaller. So how many feet are in 1 yard? There are 3. So I'm going to take this number and I'm going to times it by 3. So 6 times 3 would be 18 feet. Yards to mile. Yards are pretty small measurement compared to miles, so that means that I'm going to multiply something here to get this number where there's more of them. So how many yards are there in a mile? You'd have to look back at that chart. I happen to know that it's 1,760, which means I'm going to multiply those together. Okay, so 3 times 1,760 is 5,280, 280 yards. The reason I'm pausing there is I'm hoping that you kind of sink in that information. The reason this is working is because I know that yards are smaller in measurement to miles, so it makes more sense that I have a whole bunch of yards if I'm comparing it to a small number of miles, okay? So this time, though, I'm going the opposite way. Oh, sorry. I ended up skipping those. I'll come back to them. This time I'm going from yards to inches. So yards is going to be my larger measurement, which means that I am going to have less of them because it's bigger than inches. So you kind of have to do a couple of things. First, you have to go from inches to feet, and then you can go from feet to yard. Your other thing to know, it's just harder to divide by 36, but there are 36 inches in a yard. What I think might be a little easier, though, is to go the other way, which is to figure out first, okay, there are 3 feet in a yard. So why don't I divide, well, actually, let's not do that. We're just going to divide it by 36, which I don't expect you to know off the top of your head. And actually, this doesn't totally help, but let's just choose then a number. Oops, 36 times 5. 5 times 6 is 30. 5 times 3 is, oh, that's too much. Okay, let's try 36 times 4. 4 times 6 is 24. Sorry, guys, 24. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So I did that correctly. That's going to be 20, sorry. What have I done? That's going to be 4 there, which would have been that 144. Okay, so that would be 4 yards is 144 inches. All right, just going to give you the answers to these 3 so we can move on to some other ones. This one would be 2,640. This would be 4.5. And number 10 would be 90 inches. Those would be good ones to go back and double check to see how we came up with those answers. But I do want to talk to you about, oops, I moved to the wrong bar. I'm going to want to talk to you about perimeter, which is something it's probably been a while since you did. Perimeter is your measuring of all the sides around something, which means you're just going to simply add. The problem here, though, is you've got feet and inches. So you need to either convert everything to inches or you need to convert everything to feet. It doesn't matter. Oh, I lied. It does matter. This tells you in your problem right here that this needs to be feet instead of inches, okay? So I need to change 36 inches into feet. I know that there are 12 inches in a foot, so I'm going to divide this by 12. And 36 divided by 12 is 3. So that means altogether there I would have 3 feet. And then in order to find the perimeter, I just need to add 3, 5, and 4, which becomes 12. And the way you label that is just with feet because there's nothing squared about it. And then 2 and 3 are done, so that's nice. And then I have 12 inches, which is, we know easily is 1 foot, so that was easy enough. And then over here I have 24 inches, and again, if you divide that by 12, you're going to get 2 feet. The hardest part about this one, though, in my opinion, they didn't label anything over here, but if you're going to find the perimeter of a shape, you also need to have the exact same one over here. So this will also be 1 foot. And now if I were to add this, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So altogether, this would have a perimeter of 9 feet. Okay, we got 2 pages of word problems. I'm going to go ahead and solve these ones with you. And then again, it's asking you to check your answer is reasonable, but I want you just to think about the size difference. Does it make sense for my answer to be a really big number or a really small number, depending on what I'm measuring in, okay? Nick needs 65 yards of wire for a project. If the wire is only sold on spools which hold 6 feet of wire, how many spools will he need? I think it's going to be easier to change this to yards. So if he needs 65 yards and each spool holds 2 yards of wire. Let's talk about how I got to 2 yards. Well, there are 3 feet in a yard, and he has 2 groups of 3 feet, so that's going to be 2 yards. So now all I have to do is 65 yards divided by 2, because I want to just know how many groups of 2 I need. So 2 will go into 6 3 times, and then 2 will go into 5 2 times. And I'm left with 32.5, but I'm going to be willing to bet that he's not able to buy a half a yard, or sorry, a half of a spool of wire. So that means we're going to have to round up here. We're going to have to go from 32.5, and we're going to need to know that he's going to need 33 spools of wire there in order to in order to do his project. For this next problem, we are working with Jessie, who's got some fabric issues. It says Jessie has 9 feet of blue fabric. So this is what she already has. To finish making her costume, she needs 1/3 of that amount of red fabric. The fabric store sells fabric by the yard. How much fabric does Jessie need to buy? Well, she already has 9 feet, but the reason we need to know that is because we need 1/3 of 9 feet. There's a couple of ways. You could totally just figure out that that's like 9 divided by 3, but you could also just multiply that by 1/3, which will still give you 3. So she's going to need 3 feet of red fabric. Well, this one's a really easy conversion. Then it just says they sell it by the yard. So if she's got 3 feet of fabric, that's going to equal 1 yard of fabric. They will be the same thing. Okay, let's talk about Jay. Jay runs 1.5 miles at track practice. Teddy runs the 100-yard dash, and Katie runs half as far as Jay. How many yards do they run all together? Well, that's a lot. I can tell here, though, that I do need my answer to be in yards. So I'm going to start first with Jay, and I'm going to try to figure out how many yards that is. Well, I know that there are 1,760 yards in a mile. So I know that I'm going to have one group of 1,760 yards because that's his 1 mile. But then I also need to find a half of a mile. So I need to find half of this amount and add it to it. So let's figure out what half of 1,760 is. I'm going to divide that by 2. 2 goes into 17 8 times. Minus 16. Oh gosh, I'm going to run out of room. You guys are going to bear with me here. 2 goes into 16 8 times. Minus 16. Oh, that's actually pretty easy. And then 2 goes into 0. So that means that this is his 1 mile in yards, and this is then that half of a mile in yards. And if I add those two together, that means that he will have traveled 2,640 yards altogether. So I've got Jay done. Jay is traveling 2,640 yards. Okay, well, let's look at Teddy. It says Teddy runs the 100-yard dash. So that's easy enough. Teddy only ran 100 yards. And then it says Katie runs half as far as Jay. So I need to now take Jay's amount, which was 2,640, and I need to find half of that. So 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into 6 3 times. And then 2 goes into 4 2 times. These are pretty easy division problems, actually. And then that would be nothing. So that means that Katie was able to travel 1,320 yards. So then it says how many yards do they run all together, which just means I need to add those together. How convenient that Mrs. Glassy stacked them so well. And that should be all together 4,060 yards. That would be your final answer there. But that one's not necessarily hard, just lots to the problem. I'm going to give you some advice. I would love it if you actually paused this video and you finished these 3 problems on your own. If you could do these 3 and then check the answers with me, that would be all I would want you to do for math today. If you'd rather just see what the answers are and go do something else, that's fine. But otherwise, this would be a really great opportunity for you to practice and see if your answer was correct by pausing and then checking your work. So hopefully you did that. The answer to number 15 was $1.25. The answer to number 17 was 249 feet. And the answer to number 18 was $14.90. Okay? So good news. If you just did those 3 problems, you are done for today. If you didn't and your brain was a little fried, that's fine. You do need to show a little bit more work, though. You need to either do 8-4 or maybe you would need to go try out one of those iExcel pages. But no matter what, remember you can always check into Zoom if you're needing some help. I would love to help you out from 11 to 12 every day. And otherwise, good luck.